Tonight, we journey far back in time to the cradle of civilization, to a world where rivers carved cities out of dust, and where daily life was governed not just by kings or crops, but by the will of distant gods, written in the patterns of the stars and etched into clay tablets. You are about to walk through the mud-brick alleys of ancient Mesopotamia, a land that gave us the first written laws, the first cities, and perhaps the first complaints about taxes. But don't worry, this will be a slow and soothing journey. No sudden sounds, no dramatic retellings, just a gentle unraveling of what life once was and how fragile it could be. We begin, as always, with the simplest question. What would it be like if you were there? Why you wouldn't survive a day in ancient Mesopotamia? Imagine yourself waking to the sound of a reed flute, far off and barely audible, a signal that the temple gates have opened for morning ritual. The air is dry, warm, even before the sun has fully risen. Your bed, if it can be called that, is a woven mat on a hard floor of sun-baked mud brick. The room is small, windowless, dim, and carries the faint scent of oil and dust. You are a worker, perhaps a laborer or a tenant farmer, or maybe a potter. In ancient Mesopotamia, roles were inherited more often than chosen. Your father hauled water, and so do you. Your first task, before the day's heat becomes unbearable, is irrigation. The fields outside the city walls depend on narrow canals fed by the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, both lifelines and threats. Their floods are unpredictable, their moods are often cruel. With a rope-wrapped yoke across your shoulders, you carry heavy ceramic jars to and from the nearest canal, over and over. The water is murky and warm, but it is sacred in its utility. It will determine whether your barley grows, whether your children eat. Your feet sink slightly into the black silt as you walk, warm, wet earth clinging to your ankles. The sun climbs higher. By midday, your shift turns toward the temple, not for worship, not today, but for tax. You don't pay in silver or coin. You pay in barley, measured out in woven baskets, tallied by a scribe perched on a low stool with a stylus and a tablet of fresh clay. His fingers are stained with dust and dried mud, and his expression never changes. You hand over your due, as your father once did. The grain disappears into the storehouses behind the whitewashed walls of the temple compound. Some will go to feed the priests, some to the granaries for lean years. Some may vanish into the ledgers, never to be seen again. The scribe does not thank you. Next, you receive word that the city's officials need men for canal maintenance. The water level has dropped again. No explanation. Perhaps the gods are angry. Perhaps a rival city diverted the flow upstream. It doesn't matter. You are expected to dig, and so you do, hacking through reeds and mud under the weight of a relentless sun. There is no shade, only the low hum of flies and the creak of wooden shovels. Later, when the sky begins to shift into the soft ochres of dusk, you return home. The walk is slow, your body aches, but before you rest, you make a small offering. A pinch of grain at the tiny shrine in your courtyard, to Enlil or Inanna, or whichever deity your family holds dear. The gods are everywhere, in the wind, in the harvest, in your misfortunes. They must be appeased. You light a small oil lamp, its flicker dances across the walls. Tonight, like most nights, you eat little. Flatbread and onions, perhaps a thin beer brewed from leftover grain. You speak quietly with your family. You sleep early because the sun does not wait. You wonder as your eyes grow heavy. Will the barley ripen this year? Will the gods be merciful? Will the tax be higher next season? The rhythm of life here is simple but never soft. A balance of obedience, toil, and worry. No rest without offering. No water without labor. No joy without divine permission. And so the days continue, not in triumph, not in despair, but in quiet survival, from flood to drought, from sunrise to dusk. The rise and fall of Sargon the Great. Now that we've walked through the narrow alleys of the everyday, through the silted canals and the quiet fears of the ordinary, we shift our attention to a single man who dared to rise above the mud-brick walls that hemmed in most lives. Let us speak gently of Sargon, not the conqueror you might picture in a textbook, not the sharp edge of empire in a blaze of battle, but rather the child first. A boy set adrift in a reed basket on the currents of the Euphrates. A legend, yes, but one told for centuries in hushed tones by scribes and priests who claim to remember. His mother, they say, was a priestess. His father unknown. The child's birth was inconvenient, possibly forbidden, and so he was placed in a basket, sealed with pitch, and entrusted to the river, a story that echoes faintly in other traditions far beyond the Mesopotamian plain. The boy survived, and he grew. Raised by a gardener, it is said, a servant of the palace in the ancient city of Kish. His early years were not royal. He moved among irrigation trenches and tree-lined temple courtyards. He learned labor first, and then language, and he learned how to listen. At some point, no one can say exactly when, Sargon entered the court of Ur-Zababa, king of Kish. Perhaps he served as a cupbearer, a modest position, but one that placed him close to the throne, close to whispers, to opportunity. Now, imagine Sargon, a young man still, standing quietly in the shadows of the palace court, the air thick with incense, scribes moving like ghosts behind hanging curtains, soldiers polishing spears beneath flickering torchlight. He watches, learns, waits, and then a shift. Whether by conspiracy, prophecy, or sheer force of ambition, Sargon seizes power. The city of Kish falls into his hands, and with it the keys to the northern trade routes. But Sargon is not content with one city. His eyes drift south, toward the lush cities of Sumer, toward Uruk, Ur, and Lagash, ancient places where kings wore their titles like divine skin. His campaign begins slowly. A city here, a temple there. Resistance is fierce. These cities are proud, old, and jealous. But Sargon is relentless. He forms alliances, builds an army not of nobles, but of loyal men trained under his rule. His power grows like the rivers in flood season, unstoppable, unpredictable. Eventually, Sargon does what no man had done before. He unites the fractured city-states of Mesopotamia under one rule, one empire, one king. He calls it Akkad, and from this moment a new kind of world begins. But empires, like rivers, have moods. At the height of his power, Sargon rules from the city of Agade, its exact location lost to time. His court is filled with scribes, priests, generals. Tribute arrives daily, copper from the mountains, timber from the north, lapis lazuli from distant lands. He installs loyal governors in each city, each temple. The gods now answer to one king. But the burden of unity is heavy. Rebellions flare, famines arrive. The loyalty of conquered cities proves fragile. There are murmurs that the gods are displeased, that Sargon's ambitions stretch too far into the divine. Some say the river no longer rises in time, that omens turn sour, that the heavens grow silent. Sargon ages. In the final years of his rule, he fights desperately to hold the empire together. Some cities rise in open revolt, others pay lip service while hoarding tribute. The cracks widen. He dies eventually, peacefully perhaps, or in worry. His sons rule after him. Then his grandson, Naram-Sin, who calls himself king of the 4 quarters of the earth. But the gods, it seems, grow weary of these declarations. The empire unravels. A god disappears from history, buried possibly by enemies or time. And yet Sargon remains, not in monuments or statues, not even in great tombs, but in the very idea of empire. The notion that a man, born a servant, abandoned at birth, could one day command the known world. That dream, that fragile possibility, echoes still. As we leave the memory of Sargon behind, imagine his reed basket floating again, this time not down the river, but through time, past Babylon, past Rome, past now, and into the quiet stillness of your own thoughts. In our next segment, we turn away from conquest, and instead peer closely at the tools of permanence, the clay tablets that captured every whisper, quarrel, hymn, and law, pressed gently beneath the stylus of a scribe 5,000 years ago. The secrets of cuneiform tablets. Let us now turn inward, away from the courts and conquests, away from the sun-baked fields, and into the cool interior of a scribe's room. Quiet, dimly lit, the scent of damp clay and burnt reeds hangs softly in the air. You're sitting now beside a low table. Before you lies a fresh slab of moist clay, no larger than your palm, yet heavy with potential. This is not a place of power, not in the grand sense, and yet, in ancient Mesopotamia, it is the scribe, silent, patient, steady, who shapes the memory of a civilization. We begin with the tool, a stylus, usually made of sharpened reed, cut with care. It doesn't carve, but presses, wedge by wedge, into the surface of the clay. The script it produces is called cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge-shaped. Its symbols are neither letters nor pictures, but somewhere in between, evolving over centuries from pictographs to abstract marks. At first, this writing was purely practical, an accounting system, a way to record the debts of farmers, the number of sheep delivered, the amount of barley owed to the temple. You can almost hear the gentle clicks of the stylus as it presses into the damp clay, mark by mark, transaction by transaction. But as centuries passed, the tablets multiplied, and they began to contain far more than numbers. In dusty archives beneath ziggurats, tablets were stacked in careful rows, shelf after shelf, labeled by clay tags like early library cards. Here, you'd find royal decrees, hymns to the gods, contracts, curses, prophecies, even recipes and love poems. Imagine yourself now as a scribe, perhaps in the temple of Nippur. You are not a priest, but you are close to the sacred. Your hands know the weight of history. Each morning, you smooth a slab of clay and begin again. Not fast, never fast, but rhythmically, the same way others might knead dough or spin wool. You record a lease for a plot of land. The terms are clear. Dates, names, witnesses, all pressed into the clay. When the writing is finished, you leave it to dry in the sun. Sometimes, for permanence, it is baked in a kiln. The result? A record that might survive for 5,000 years. Indeed, many did. Some were buried in temple walls. Others were lost in fires, which ironically preserved them, hardening the clay into stone, and then in time they slept beneath the earth, until modern hands unearthed them again. In one such tablet, a man named Aradnana writes to his overseer, "Why have you not sent the oil? I have written to you 5 times. The tone is familiar. Irritation, urgency, the language of bureaucracy. Elsewhere, a mother pens a letter to her son, a student in another city. She scolds him gently for not writing home. Are you alive? Why have I not heard from you? And in another, older still, a hymn to Inanna, Queen of Heaven, shining in her splendor, fierce and radiant as a lion. Thousands of these tablets survive, each one a quiet voice, murmuring across the millennia. Not the voices of kings and gods, though they appear too, but the everyday rhythms of people, who worked, traded, complained, loved, and feared. Even lawsuits were recorded. If 2 neighbors disputed the ownership of a field, the scribe would write the terms. Witnesses would impress their seals. Small carved cylinders rolled across the clay like tiny sacred stamps. Imagine now the soft light of a winter afternoon in Babylon. A boy leans over a clay slab in a schoolroom, trying to memorize the symbols. The teacher, stern but patient, watches. The boy's stylus slips. He sighs, reshapes the clay, and begins again. In this world, memory is not held in books or on paper. It is etched into the very earth. Each tablet is fragile, yet lasting. Each word, though silent, endures. And now, as we rise gently from the scribe's chamber, let us carry with us that sense of care, of language made by hand, and prepare to ascend, not in power or might, but up stone steps into sacred shadow. Our final segment will lead us into the heart of a ziggurat, where the high priests of ancient Mesopotamia gazed toward the stars, seeking meaning in their alignment and guidance from the divine. Inside the ziggurat, life of a high priest. Now let us leave the clay tablets behind. Let them rest in their sunlit courtyards, drying under the patient gaze of scribes. Let us step softly through the winding alleys of the city, past open-air markets and sleeping dogs, and gaze upward. There, above the clustered rooftops of mud brick and woven reed, rises something unlike anything else, a vast, tiered monument of stone and sun-baked earth. A ziggurat. Its sides rise in wide, receding levels. Giant steps toward the heavens. Each terrace was once painted in vivid colors, red, blue, white, though time has long since faded them to dust and ochre. At the very top, a small temple, sacred, silent. This is not a place for the public, not for merchants or laborers. Only priests ascend these steps, and of them, only a few may reach the top. Imagine yourself just for a moment as one of them, a high priest, robed in finely woven cloth, embroidered with symbols of the stars, sandals of soft leather, skin lightly perfumed with cedar oil, your eyes trained not on the marketplace below, but on the sky above. You live apart from the city's noise. Your quarters are within the ziggurat's shadow, cool and shaded, walls lined with scrolls, tablets, and ritual objects. You eat little, speak softly, and follow a schedule older than memory. Your days are shaped by ritual. Every act is sacred. At sunrise, you bathe in clear water from the temple basin, not for hygiene but for purification. Then, dressed in ceremonial garments, you enter the shrine. You light incense of myrrh and sweet resin. You chant, low and rhythmic, as the smoke curls upward toward the unseen gods. Your primary duty? To intercede, to read signs, to interpret omens. You observe the flight of birds, the shapes of clouds, the liver of a sacrificed animal. You consult the stars, carefully recorded on clay charts. Their movements are messages, warnings, instructions. A sudden eclipse? Perhaps the god Enlil is displeased, a comet, a coming war. You do not rule, but your words guide kings. In your presence, scribes take notes. Offerings are weighed and burned. Requests from citizens are whispered at the temple gate. for health, for sons, for rain. But your life is not one of luxury. The rituals are endless. You must remain clean. Abstain from certain foods, from certain company. At night, you sleep in silence. Your dreams, too, are sacred. They are recorded each morning for signs. Sometimes you wake before dawn and climb the ziggurat steps, barefoot, feeling each rise beneath your soles. At the top, the temple proper, known as the Ikur, the mountain house. It is modest, rectangular, its walls painted with sacred scenes. Inside, no idol, no golden statue, just an altar, an emptiness. The god does not reside in sculpture, but in presence, in the wind, in the light that filters through a high window, in the whisper of flame. There are moments when, standing there alone, you feel something vast, not fear exactly, but a silence so deep it hums, as though the world holds its breath. During festivals, the temple comes alive. Processions move through the streets, musicians, dancers, animals for sacrifice. The king may ascend the lower steps, but never the top. That space belongs only to the divine. You offer food to the gods, grain, honey, wine, lamb. You do not believe they eat in the human sense, but their approval depends on your faithfulness. A mistake, a forgotten word, could offend. The city depends on your perfection. In return, the people offer their trust. If the rains come, if the harvest is strong, it is thanks to the gods, and to you, their servant. And yet, there are nights when doubt visits you. You gaze at the stars, those ancient eyes in the sky, and wonder if they truly see. If the gods hear the chants, smell the incense, notice the sacrifices. You wonder if your years of purity, of discipline, mean anything at all, or if the heavens are as empty as the temple at dawn. But these thoughts are not shared. You continue. You follow the scrolls. You perform the rites. You are not just a man. You are the thread between earth and sky. And in this way, quietly and steadily, the ziggurat breathes.